Hello and welcome. It is Women's Crush Wednesday. This is the third day of the Can Diversity Collective's Inkwell Beach Live. We are so excited to be here this morning. This is day 3. This is all day women. Like, you cannot find a better place to be with the most amazing women all day long, from 8:30 a.m. all the way to 6:30 this evening, and it is a power-packed day. So I hope you guys are ready for this excitement. I hope you're ready for this first conversation. We have 4 amazing CEO women that have joined us this morning. We have Catherine Connors. Say hey, Catherine, wave. We have Val DiFebo. Hopefully I did that right. Val DiFebo. We have Megan Cunningham.
Hello.
We have Beth and Kaminkow. Hello, ladies. Okay, I'm just going to get started. And, our topic is Amy, Becky, and Karen. Get your girls. I mean, please. What's going on? I want you guys to help me understand this. I want you to talk me through it, talk our crew through it. Just pretend that you and we all hung out last night and we just saw some bad behavior. So this morning we're having a discussion about what went on last night, or what went on in the last, 3, 4, 5, 50 years of white women behaving badly. So just, we're going to have the conversation. When you start talking, just introduce yourself, tell us where you're from, and just give us some thoughts and perspectives on what's going on right now. Catherine, will you start?
Absolutely. So I'm Catherine. I'm in Los Angeles. It's very early in the morning.
Thank you for waking up. Thank you.
No, honored and excited for this conversation. I'm the CEO of the League of Badass Women, which is a private global network of female leaders, innovators, and change agents. We're about 12,000 plus of us around the world. And a former Disney executive, girl advocate. I would, like some of my problematic sisters, describe myself as liberal, progressive feminist. So I'm excited for this conversation because, to your point, Adrienne, I think the core piece of this that's challenging for some of us is that this isn't the Beckys and Karens of the last couple of months aren't the ones that we can dismiss as white feminists of women in the South or Republican women. Amy Cooper was someone who would have described herself as one of us, liberal, progressive, and all the right things. And so she, obviously, all of this stuff has been going on for a long time, but I think she in particular forced a bit of a reckoning upon us and forced us into the conversation in a way that compelled us to say, okay, in the same way that we ask that men not say #not all men, that they're not the bad ones, they're the good ones. As white women, we have to come to the table and say, we can't exclude to say not me, #not all white women, that we're complicit in this. We have to really, really look at what these dynamics are with our sisters. And the language you're using, I think, is important because at this moment in time, we can't just say, she's not me and she's not me, and that woman I'm identifying as racist over there is not me. Amy, Becky, Karen, they're part of our communities. They're really and so the most important foundational work we have to start with is identifying ourselves in that complicity and asking ourselves, why are they me, right? What does this have to do with me?
Right. Megan, I saw you nodding your head. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many layers, I think, to this topic that it's challenging to even think about where to begin. But first of all, I'm Megan Cunningham, the CEO of Magnet Media. We do purpose-driven work for brands and storytelling. And I wanted to start by saying that I think that, this whole idea of, the general history of these recent acts actually goes way back, and that, there's power in naming as an act of resistance, putting a name to a behavior or to actions is a way of sort of gaining solidarity over an injustice. So I know there's been sort of a backlash on Twitter and stuff as these names have surfaced, and people are resenting and feeling frustrated, I think, by the idea of these actions sort of being named as a single character or as a single actor, and that sort of paints a group as one. But the fact is, number one, like, that's a flipping of the script. which I think is pretty interesting. And it's really interesting to see that, you know what, no one likes being categorized or generalized in those ways. And this behavior is so extreme, and obviously in many cases was caught on camera, whether it's, you know, a tantrum thrown at Starbucks, or calling the police on a family having a barbecue, or, you know, asking for someone to put a dog on a leash by calling the police. I mean, there's such extreme overreactions that I think they sort of typify what has been, you know, general behavior that frankly has been below the radar of a lot of white liberal audiences, and even white women in general, as we think about feminism and its long history of not being inclusive. And so that's a very long-winded way of saying that. I think that just to start at the point of backlash, I loved the title of this panel, and I'm honored, Adrienne, to be part of this conversation this morning, because I think it's really important that we recognize the power of sort of claiming back those names, maybe having a laugh about it, even though these issues are far from laughable. And then, you know, thinking through, how do these apply to my actions? I always go back to the quote, we judge ourselves by our intentions and others by their actions and behavior. And I think that, you know, it's an important opportunity to look in the lens, examine the ways in which we are replicating white supremacy, the ways in which all of us are really benefiting from unearned privilege as white women. And how can we lift our sisters up? How can we find, you know, Black people in our lives, in our community, and on our teams that we can support and amplify and empower?
Yeah, I like that. You said two things that stuck out in my head. Of one was flipping the script, you know, and how people are offended and kind of like pushed into one sort of category. Like, you know, we Black people have experienced that, you know, forever, and, you know, demonized by the color, the look, the title, you know, that Black person did this. Did we all do that, or was it a few bad actors? And the other piece you brought up is being under the radar. My question is, has it always been under the radar? Is it under the radar, or just people just deciding not to acknowledge it? You see it, you know it, and you don't respond to it. So we'll talk about that throughout the conversation, but I just wanted to duly note those things. We'll put on the chalkboard and come back to it. How about you, Beth Ann? What do you have to say about what we're talking about today?
Well, first of all, thank you, Adrienne. This is a privilege to be part of this conversation, and obviously more broadly, as we're going to talk about today. I'm Beth Ann Kaminkow. I'm the global CEO of Geometry. It's a WPP company, and we're focused in the creative commerce space. So, I mean, obviously, a lot of comments that I would make have been already put out there, and I think that's good that we are speaking from the same script, a flipped one for sure. And I think what I would just add is, again, relevant to the field that a lot of us are in as well. I think it was Will Smith that said, you know, the main difference right now is that we're filming it. And that was certainly what happened in Central Park. And I'm grateful for that, to be honest. I first of all, thank goodness technology has taken us to where it has, because going through a pandemic like this globally, if it wasn't for things like Zoom or platforms like this, I can't imagine how even more disconnected we would be. But I think this has shed light on how disconnected actually we were, many of us. And I remember hearing right after George Floyd, someone said something like, if you're surprised by this, if seeing what you saw surprises you in some way, then that's a sign of racism right there. You know, that's a sign of massive disconnect. And I think that's maybe where some of the guilt starts to come too, because you actually say to yourself, when you're being really honest, wow, that was incredibly hard to see as a human being. And I am actually mortified and surprised. I was surprised by Central Park, quite honestly.
Wow.
And so I think in terms of naming this, the fact that we have to start with knowing better by seeing better, and actually forcing ourselves to look at and see for all that it is, what is going on around us in a way that's maybe being magnified. But to your point, Adrienne, others are maybe seeing and living with every single day, multiple times a day. I think it has just opened up the aperture and the scope for more people to be held accountable and to start to learn from it, and make that part of their view every day, no matter how painful that is. And I think that's part of what we're seeing in the sensitivity that's happening right now, and some of the defensiveness around that is that, the first feeling that you have is sort of like the feelings of grief is intense amounts of pain. And I think we're all feeling that as a community. That the difference is that others have been feeling it for their whole lifetime.
Right.
And others may have in stages or in moments, but not to the degree that it's now part of our daily conversation.
You brought up one interesting point about guilt. We will circle back to guilt. I wrote it down. We're going to hold that point. Val, give us more.
So yeah, it's hard. Everybody's so on top of this. You guys said all the stuff I would love to say. Catherine, I couldn't agree with you more. First of all, I'm Val. Sorry, I'm Val DiFebo, and I'm the CEO of Deutsch in New York. And we are a full-service advertising agency celebrating our 50th year. And we like to differentiate ourselves by our culture. And so I can talk more about that later when I talk about some of the stuff that we're doing as a result of all of this. Catherine, I couldn't agree with you more that, I think my own bias was I didn't think this was happening in Central Park. I was like, oh, they do that, not us. We don't do that. I'm not one of them. And so to really flip that focus and say, I need to look at myself in the mirror and think about, what did Amy do and why? Why did she do that? And I think part of what I think about is it's easy for people to join a movement and march and say Black Lives Matter or let's treat people equally. But the truth is that when her own place in society was the thing that started to get questioned, like all of a sudden this Black man might have something on me. I'm doing something wrong. And he's pointing it out to me. Well, all of a sudden she's really uncomfortable. And that's different than being in a group that says, Black Lives Matter or everyone should get equal pay. Because now it's me and you. And that's the thing that I'm looking at and saying, are there situations when it's me and you, whether those are microaggressions or other things that are happening in the environment we work in, where we have to look at that power shift and say, is this a place where that could be manifesting itself? Because I think that's at least where it puts some focus for me. But I couldn't agree with you guys more. It's like, I want to believe that's somewhere else. I want to believe it's under the, that I haven't seen it. I agree with Will Smith. Thank God people are filming these things because it puts it right in your face. Right. It's right in your face. You have to look at it. And even if you say, I don't believe that, the truth is it's right in your face. You have to believe it. So, yeah. So that's the different thing I would say is it made it personal versus something out in the world that is a righteous thing to do.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that struck me, and you guys touched on it a little bit, is that, one, you guys said she could have been one of us. She's liberal. She, went to big school. She adopted a dog. She was feeling like she's a part of the movement. But something inside of her triggered. She learned that behavior somewhere, that she could use her whiteness, her feminine whiteness as a weapon against a Black man. Where did she learn that, being so woke as she thought she was, but she knew at a moment that she could do an Oscar performance and get on the phone and call the police? Where do you think that came from?
Did you want to say something, Catherine, or I don't want to interrupt you.
It's an excellent question, arguably one of the most important questions for us. Why did she do it? And, I can venture a couple of reasons, right? And there's two questions, why and where did she learn it? I think on the where did she learn it, it's one of the ways in which white supremacy just has seeped into the very architecture of our social and cultural system. That you can really, it doesn't have to be top of mind, conscious, habituated learning. It can seep into your psyche that this is what this could work, right? She even said, she did an interview, like, made a very, very brief comment that she thought of the police as a sort of her own protection agency, right? Which is something that we should come back to about how different communities view that. But she felt threatened, right? And we need to look at why she felt threatened. And so she went immediately into, I can do this, right? She felt threatened, not physically. I think it's really clear that there was really no reason for her to feel threatened physically, but her ego felt threatened, her power felt threatened. And there's lots of, there's been ample scholarly research on the dynamics of what people do when they feel like, I'm going to grasp at whatever thread of power I think I can and should in a moment. Her ego felt threatened. She was being challenged on doing something wrong. And she went to that place of, I'm going to pull a lever of power that I know I have, right? A dangerous one, a terrible one.
Right.
But the thing that, white women in particular, I think get socialized in a million implicit ways that you can do this thing. You might not have power in this sphere, this sphere, this sphere, but you can always use your femininity, right? You can always use your tears, your fragility, your fear, and you can turn that into a weapon. So when we talk about white tears as weapons, it's not some just vague abstraction. It's not something that's being described from the outside. It's an actual thing that we do, right? That we've been socialized to know that in a situation, if you feel like you need to pull somebody for power, you can pull that one. You can pull your fragile white lady, I'm in danger, stop threatening me tool, and and have that be your act of power. And the thing of it is that we tend not to look at those. We have our own sort of virtue armor around, well, that's not dominating power, that's not conquering power.
Right.
And we've managed to do a lot of sort of philosophical and psychological abstracting to divest ourselves of responsibility in those situations and not call it for what it is. To Megan's earlier very, very important point, we have never named it until I think now.
So is there like a class on how to be a white girl 101 that you learned this information? Like, should we take that class so we understand the dynamics of where this all comes from? I just find it fascinating that you said, somewhere you learn the lessons of that power of what to do when you feel threatened. It's just, it boggles my mind that she would actually know to do that. And it just came out so naturally. So it just made me wonder, like, where did that actually come from? Megan, you wanted to say something about that too?
Yeah, the power of socialization, it's invisible is what's so difficult about getting rid of it and unlearning. When I apply for a credit card as a white person, I get a better rate. That is a known fact, right? In many, many large global banks, I get a better rate by being a white person because their algorithm is racist. As a woman, I get a worse rate than as a man because of the algorithm as well. So I'm both oppressed and privileged in many different ways. And I think all of our identities are made up of these matrixed identities in which we're accessing privilege and we're also oppressing just by being a member of society that's already biased. And so I think what's difficult about that is, the word racist is such a loaded term and triggers so many, and people feel, especially those that are performing allyship on a regular basis, donating to the right causes, voting for the right candidates, marching in the right protests, all of that feels good and like I'm a good guy, and how could I possibly be racist because me and all my white friends are also fighting racism, and all of that. I don't mean to dismiss it. All of those are important actions. Those performances are important performances, and at the same time, if you're not translating that performative allyship into actual daily unlearning and relearning in terms of how can I be a better ally? How can I be more supportive? How can I not access my white privilege for my own gain over others, but bring others up, use it as a superpower, right? My friend Garapunde recently wrote about how, Superman doesn't feel guilty about his superpowers. Privilege is not something that's designed to make us feel bad. It's something that we can access as a tool to bring others up. And I think that to me is really the switch of mindset that needs to happen. And also looking at the fact that performative allyship in many ways is a cover. If you are doing things that are simply symbolic, that's not enough. That's not acceptable as a brand, as a large corporation. Making a huge donation, changing your social media slogans, like those are all great first steps. And now what are you doing to follow up? What are you doing to diversify your organization, to, raise the bar for not only gender parity, but, equal pay across all identities, and to, frankly, promote more Black leaders. This is a huge gap in boards, in senior leadership, in our own organization. We're not free of that. And so I think that, this is a real opportunity to shine a spotlight on all those injustices and get beyond sort of the black and white terminology of racist or non-racist, and really learn how to be better allies.
Right. You mentioned a term, symbolic gesture, and I talk about that all the time, of the symbolic gestures that happen. And then, we give hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars. We do the signs, we make these temporary things. And I think a lot of times we get lulled by the idea of doing, but there's no real action behind it. Yes. And I know, we're in the industry of storytelling. All of us are advertising marketers. We have a lot of power and privilege even in that. So how are you guys thinking about shifting that narrative? You obviously all see it, what's happening, but with your power that you have as leaders of global advertising, agencies, what are you doing to help shift that narrative? Beth Ann, I'm going to throw that one to you. What's happening with Geometry?
Well, obviously we're still very early days in elevating the priority, because it's not like it wasn't there before. But as I mentioned before, we're a creative commerce agency. So what we're trying to do, in the same thing in terms of superpower, is think about it from the standpoint of commerce. This is about sort of an economic element as well. And what can we do to start to use privilege from an economic standpoint to help people thrive and to get started in ways that maybe wasn't possible before. So understanding that entire sort of supply chain to getting more minority businesses up and running. We're going through a time where we have to all stimulate our economies and support people that maybe weren't supported in the ways that they could be now. We work with Google and a lot of companies on the small and medium-sized business space. So how can we help get people to start more businesses from what would have typically been a minority business ownership standpoint? How can we make sure that the ones that exist today are set up to thrive and to make it through a really hard time and hard period? So we're looking at the organizations that support that, and how can we lean in by giving pro bono services or using the work that we do, for good and for betterment. And then we're looking at it more globally in terms of other large multinational corporations that sit within our space, even marketplaces like an Amazon or a Walmart or others that have large, massive scale. And what are they doing to bring in craftsmen and artists and people who, book writers and sellers, the people that maybe haven't been able to get the level of support and marketing and muscle behind them. So that was sort of the first place that we went, is, how do we use the tools of our trade in a way that lean into the very causes that matter right now in a sustainable way? Because I think the other thing that we've all mentioned, and you mentioned here too, is there could be these sort of token acts. And I think you see a lot of people either all doing the same thing and they've got like a playbook that they're following, or they're sort of checking boxes, and they're having all these emergency meetings to talk about something that again sort of helps it go away. And it sort of helps them manage through a moment in time and situation, versus recognizing what we're all seeing here, that this is something that has been going on for our lifetime. And how are we going to start to do things that shift the lifetime narrative, that allow this new generation to live in a different world, and make sure that the moves that we're making now are going to shift and shape the future of the world that we're living in, and do something that creates sustainable ways that have the tentacles out there in ways that also will touch other parts of society that then need to be challenged. Because the other thing I know in the learning that I'm doing, and I'm sure all of us here, you uncover these connections and these interdependencies that create the strength in the wrong direction. And you start to peel back these layers and you realize, wow, that policy, that decision, that law, there is so much complexity to this that I think as businesses now, and corporations, we're seeing a different level, I think, of yes, privilege, but also responsibility to start to attack these issues and uncover them, be vocal about what we're learning and what we're seeing, and we get more people involved in helping us move in the right direction.
Yeah. How about you, Val? I mean, we talked a little bit about, what I heard Beth Ann say, and a little bit that Megan touched on is, this is systemic. It's built into the core of our society, and I would venture to say into the advertising industry and agencies. Like, we're still looking bleak on numbers as it relates to Black people in the advertising industry, people of color. So it's built in and baked in, right? So how do we dismantle it, in a role of president and CEO? What can we do to dismantle that systemic problem that we have? And I know it's not like a quick fix in this, 30 minutes we have in our conversation left, but, there's some moves that we can make. What are you thinking that can be done, from your standpoint?
Our initial thinking was, actions speak louder than words. And so we said, we don't want to take on 50 things. We want to do 3 or 4 things that are important that can, as Beth Ann was saying, kind of change the future for the generations ahead. And so we have a couple of things we're doing, but then I want to talk to you about something that I think is actually the most important, so we're doing our version of the Rooney Rule, which is like, you have to make sure that there are a certain amount of candidates of color, and particularly Black ones, that we're interviewing for jobs. And while we always said we were doing that, the truth is we never looked at the statistics and said, okay, no, you didn't do what you were supposed to do. And so now there's accountability there. We set up a scholarship program so that we can get people who are interested, but maybe can't afford to go to a school where they can then be fast-tracked into an advertising agency. So we're setting up a scholarship. We hope our clients will join us so we can have more than one. Mm-hmm. And importantly, this came out of our folks. On the local level, a lot of what happens is because of the people who run for office and win. And so people were saying, we don't understand who's running, what issues we're voting on. Can we do something where we educate our own folks in the towns they live in, who's running, what the issues are, what are the pros and cons, and have discussions about those so people can vote and be educated when they vote and take accountability for that vote. Right. So those are little things that we're doing. But I think the other, my Yorkie definitely is pissed. The other thing that we're doing, which is really important, is we started doing these things called open conversations. And we started just to say, if people are uncomfortable about something or whatever, and they want to talk, just phone in and we'll open up the floor. And, the first week it was a little weird and everybody was talking just about George Floyd, but they happen every week. And what's happening now is people are having conversations about Blackness and Black hair and things that they never would touch before because they were afraid to offend people. They were afraid that someone might say, that's not your space to talk in. And these open conversations have been really good because now we also extend that to our client conversations. And those pull through when you're talking about casting, different kinds of efforts that you're doing, different kinds of ways that you spend your media money. And it's the difference between couching a conversation and saying, do we have the right high-value targeted audience versus are we reaching the Black audience we need to reach, right? So we're, as you can tell from me, we're pretty much a blunt agency. And I think being able to be blunt and have those tough conversations using the right language is important for us. And it's important to get to the base of the issues with our clients. And so I feel like that's been a outcome of this is real conversations. One of our biggest clients saw a thing that we prepared for our folks about podcasts and things they could read and things, discussions and small groups that we could get together and then talk about. And they said, can you please present that to our enormous, I'm not going to tell you who it is, but enormous company, because we haven't pulled together all those resources and our people can really benefit. I think those are big changes that are happening. But I want to go back to one of the questions you asked early on. Is there like a white girl, how do I learn to cry or use my femininity? And I think what you do is you watch. And when you see someone get their way because they cry or because they act like a jerk to someone who's threatening their authority, you go, oh, that works? Oh, okay, that works. And then two things happen. Either you say that works and that's something I'm going to do, or you look at it and you go, that's disgusting and I'm not going to do that. No crying at work, or no, that's not the thing I'm going to use because it makes me sick to watch that. And so I'm actually kind of glad that all these things are coming to the surface because it makes us question some of those things that we've learned just from observing whether or not they work. And no one ever sat me down and said, if you cry with your male CEO, you're going to get a raise. In fact, that doesn't work. But when you watch people get mad and yell, something different happens when a woman yells in a room than when a man yells in a room. You're a bitch if you yell. The guy's not a bitch, but you're a bitch if you yell. So it's very interesting.
So it's like the learned behavior, the machine of learning, if you will, if I use a faux tech term because I'm not a techie, the machine learning that we watch, learn, and behave, and then repeat that behavior that gets a certain outcome. But I think it's also, we talk a lot about bystanders, and if you witness an Amy, Karen, Becky situation, what do you do? What can we do as allies to the wrongdoers, if you will? So, Catherine, you see a Becky situation happening. Are you going to check that even within your organizations? How are you going to get this? You're making the situation different. How are you going to check her and say, Karen, Amy, Becky, no, that's not how we do it, because we don't want that bad behavior to continue to cycle itself through the next generation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, in a way, and this is, I want to be careful answering it in part because in a way, it's like the temptation is like, of course, right? I am a good feminist leader.
I'll never do that, right?
Inclusive organization, and I already do that. And it's because part of it, it's part of my own virtue armor is that I've been doing this work and I have all the things that I throw up in my defense of like, what do I do? How do I contribute? How do I act? And those are all important. But I think part of, when we ask ourselves the question that you're asking me right now, the first and most important piece of that is to ask ourselves if we actually truly do recognize the problem and we're not acting out of a performative impulse, right? That we're not acting because we want to be seen to be doing the thing that is currently socially approved of, but that we recognize, first of all, that there's a clear injustice, right? So a human injustice, a moral problem that is happening, but also that there are just very, very good sort of fundamental basics of sort of human organizational collaboration that benefit when we step in and intervene on one human being racist towards another, and so that there are business reasons to do it, there are organizational reasons to do it, that we recognize that we can't actually have healthy, functioning, sustainable, long-lasting businesses, organizations, and communities if we're not really doing this work, and not doing this work for the purpose of being seen to do the work, but doing it because we know that if there's rot in our organization anywhere, and that racism is a rot that hurts the person that it's being perpetrated upon, but also hurts, it affects the health of that community. then we start there and then say, okay, well, it is absolutely crucial that I act, right?
Yeah.
And it is fundamentally crucial that I act in a way that both corrects the behavior that is an action in allyship and support of the person, who is suffering under it, and that it's figuring out how do we make sure that doesn't happen again, right?
Yeah.
How do we create a culture in which we can, as best we can, unlearn the things that we, that we have been so habituated to. And I'm glad that Val brought up the white lady school of femininity, because there is a lot of unlearning, right? And we can look at here's what it looks like when men do it, and here's how the patriarchy perpetuates it. But let's also make sure, what are all the extremely gendered socialized behaviors that make us, that put us at very real risk of perpetrating or repeating those behaviors in ways that we're not even recognizing, because they seep into our organizational structures. So it's acting in the moment, it's intervening in Central Park or in your boardroom or wherever it is that you're doing your work. And then it's making sure that you're intervening at a deeper level and working very, very hard to create not just an architecture of inclusion, but an architecture of meaningful belonging in your organization and meaningful empowerment in your organization.
So, I did mention you have that Amy, Becky, Karen situation within your organization. And we're learning to be better allies and, not be bystanders in the moment. And I think we're all held accountable to it. Megan, in your organization, if is there a culture that you're setting up that is Amy, Karen, Becky proof? What do you do? How can we proof these our spaces that make sure that there's zero tolerance, I guess, for that behavior? What systems are we putting in place for that?
Yeah, culture is a great question, Adrienne. I'm so glad you brought it up, because I think that, while as leaders, we all need to look at, diversity metrics when it comes to hiring and to curating different voices. And, when we produce a ton of, videos and podcasts for brands, hundreds of stories throughout the year, we're always looking at, the breakdown from all identities, but particularly from Black voices, making sure that we're telling Black stories consistently. And that behind the camera, in the producing roles and the storytelling roles, that we're hiring Black creatives. So I think those are sort of two dimensions that we've always been super vocal about, but we're now really publishing those statistics and also rewarding that behavior, so that this is part of now, people's compensation plan. I think that's really where, sort of you're going to see the rubber meet the road, where culture is in part something that people fuel themselves as individuals. It's what happens when a leader leaves the room, how people behave. But you need to signal that, I think, in all the ways that we do as leaders, in terms of what behavior we're rewarding and what behavior we're, sort of punishing or not tolerating. So that's a hugely important thing. And I'll just add that I think that in addition to hiring and, telling Black stories and ensuring that there is diversity throughout all of our projects, not just over the course of the year, but individually at the project level, we're really doubling down this year on mentorship. And it's something that I personally have received so much gratification from and been grateful for throughout my career, first as a mentee and then as a, sort of mentor through organizations like the Female Founder Collective and Techstars and Sundance Institute. But I think this year I'm really looking at the diversity within those groups and ensuring that there are many more, in fact, entirely new, mentees that are African American. And I think that there's one campaign I just want to shout out. My friend Kate Hewitt, who's the CMO of Bombas, put together called Pay It Forward. She was inspired by Jessica McGlory, who was a colleague of hers, and said, Black people do not have access to networks consistently throughout their careers, and that this is one of the invisible ways in which privilege and oppression is holding us back. And so she put together a crowdsourced effort among leaders saying, I'm going to donate a certain bank of hours this summer. And, if it's successful, I'm going to do it on an ongoing basis, but, please join me in paying it forward. And she put up a simple Google Doc. And by the end of that week, I saw it right away as I follow her on LinkedIn and signed up. And I realized that, I said, when you're at capacity, I'll match your hours. And, dozens of other people started doing the same thing. I talked to her yesterday. She has over 1,000 C-suite leaders who have donated time this year. And it's an open source effort so that any Black person who hears of this can just sign up at whatever stage in career you're at and access, thousand and now over 1,000, sort of C-suite leaders from Silicon Valley and finance and fashion and beauty and tech. And so it's all across the board. And you literally just go in and you click a Calendly link and you just sign up. And I've had just in the first few weeks, half a dozen new mentees that have come into my life. And I really appreciate the opportunity. And I think it's really broken down, again, the social construct and the segregation that we see in our society that we're, even if we're making an effort to diversify our organizations and our personal life, there are these sort of systematic barriers that prevent that from happening. And so this is sort of, again, the flipping of the script and the effort to pay it forward.
Yeah, so it looks like you're digging deeper into sort of your broader associations and organizations. And I like the idea of taking a look at the organizations that you belong to and are they diverse in themselves, because if you're still going to the same well of people that look like you with all the great intention, the organization's not even diverse. So what's the point, And we could always say, and I'm sure all of you can say, one of my best friends is Black, I'm okay, but what are you learning from your Black friends? Are you getting, and it's, not I'm saying I'm all of your best friends, right? And it is not my responsibility to educate you on everything. I want you to do some research yourself. Beth Ann, any experience with, you can say some of my best friends are Black, and what are you getting from these relationships that are, I'm hoping is fortifying you not to turn into an Amy, Karen, Becky person?
Gosh, I hope not. I do think that my best friends would tell me, my best friends of all color would hopefully say, what is going on with you if that were the case? I want to say just one quick thing on the network, which is a funny experience that I had recently. On a run, I was thinking about, wouldn't it be awesome if LinkedIn could alert you and tell you how diverse your network is? If there was some way that it would say, you know what, you got 1% diversity in your network. And I was thinking, well, what are all the complications for them being able to do that? And could we pitch them on this idea? And then I started going into linking myself with, Adrian, we're already linked, I'm sure, but, Judy Jackson, Monique, like a number of different people. And then also the same thing about associations and schools, HSBC schools. And all of a sudden, the recommendations for me came up looking completely different. And I was like, okay, my idea is actually their algorithm, of course, right?
It is, yeah.
So what an easy thing for all of us to do as leaders, to just go into LinkedIn and start changing up our own behavior and being able to get more of what it is that we need and we're looking for. So that was just one little observation that I thought I would share with everybody. My partner at work, and so friend, is Stacy Ryan Cornelius, and she's our global CFO and COO. So I'm in an incredibly fortunate position, and I do not take that for granted. I know I didn't from the first day that we were matched together, or that I met her and we knew that we wanted to go on this journey together. I think what I've recognized the most, in terms of even opening up this deep feeling of empathy with her by my side, is during this difficult few weeks that we went through, where everyone was sort of heightened around the topic. One, recognizing how exhausted she was at the end of the day, and then the first inclination, which was, oh, you should be the chair of our global IND committee. And I was like, think about the job that she already has, and why are we giving her even more burden of responsibility, and making her the person, to the bystander point, that is going to start policing, refereeing, and calling out the bad behavior. So it was, another way for me to understand and gain insight into just the absolute importance that we all have in shouldering, getting ourselves up to speed so we have the capability to learn and take the responsibility off the shoulders of people who have been doing this every single day. That was one major insight I had. The second was she became brave enough and open enough herself to say, well, you're talking about more of our whole selves coming to work. But I haven't actually been doing that fully myself. So it made me look hard at the culture we were building to say, one, we say this, but we're actually not prepared to create the climate and the environment that allows and enables it. And then wonder to myself, like, in what ways have I not actually seen the true Stacey? Like, what if we were seeing even more of her magic and all of who she is? And what do I need to do as her partner and one of the builders of culture here and the leaders to make this an environment where we start to get to know all of who she is and what that's going to mean for the organization and how that will be a model and to empower others. And so it made me think why diversity also is so important, because if we had that more ingrained at every level of the organization, more people would be feeling that connection, discovering and uncovering those insights, and creating a much more holistic view across the organization of what partnership and allyship and equality looks like. So we're on the journey together. I'm sure there's so many more insights that will come from that. But I think when we used to say we had, as white women would say, we have Black friends or my best friend's Black. I don't even think we were speaking in a different term, which was again about guilt and judgment and defense, not actually about true relationship and what it's going to mean to have Black equal friends in our lives.
Right. I think one of the questions, one of my white guy friends I went to high school in Marshall, Texas, and he talked about when we were younger, how he would hang out. Some of his coolest friends were the Black friends. And, as long as we were at school, everything was great. And he'd be like, yeah, I'm cool with all the Black people. But he said now that he thinks about it as an adult, he never went to any of his Black friends' houses and they never came to his house. So were they friends, or was it just a circumstance of, that time and situation? How many people are we inviting to our houses that don't look like us? Like, that's when you bring them into that authentic, perfect space, that we have, or that we are in that space. But how many opportunities do we create like that to bring people who aren't like us into our space so that it is an authentic relationship? It is a true friendship. Val, you're quiet. I'm calling on you now.
I'm thinking about sort of going back to when we were asking about Amy's and Becky's and Karen's at work, and are we calling out their behavior? And I think the beginnings of that behavior in a culture like an advertising agency. So when someone sort of co-opts what a Black over someone, or they interrupt them, those are the beginnings of the things that people don't understand are setting up a system of I'm better than you, or I have the privilege of speaking, and I'll clarify what you're trying to say. They don't need clarification. So stature and their privilege press them down. I don't think they do it intentionally, but if we make it more in their face and so that they can understand it, then I think you'll start doing that. And why am I saying things like that to this person? And having said that, I do think that are the people the same way when you're a woman and all these guys speak over you. You need a guy in the room to say, that woman has something to say. And I think it's on us, white women, when our Black friends are trying to make points to say, hey, that person's saying something, listen up, because it just turns the focus, and it gives us back the power we have to use in the right way, not to co-opt what they're saying and repeat it, but to say, listen up, that person is smart, that person's got something to say.
Yeah.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, for sure.
Because I think it's a really important point, and there's a layer that I just like to.
Wait, I think
there
you're
is responsibility there. I think when people did it for us, we got promoted.
Yeah. Oh, Catherine, what were you going to say? Thanks, Val.
Yeah, sorry. I'm sorry if I spoke over you, Valerie. I think you cut out on my computer for a second. I think to add on to Val's point, I think the other thing we need to do is to also look for the Amy, Becky, Karen actions when they're less obvious, right? It's, it's easy to point out, it's easy, scare quotes, when people are speaking over each other, or when they're calling it Amy Cooper, and they're the sort of obvious, examples of racism in action. But there's a whole category of that more insidious cultural stuff. I can say, being in Southern California and the entertainment media, and certainly in women's communities, sometimes what it looks like is just the sort of quiet erasure of somebody's reality, or that the advancing of, there's definitely a hippie feminist version of all lives matter and one love and let's all get along and we're all in this together, that I think can actually in some ways be a little bit more insidious and toxic to an organizational and community culture, because it's it's a kind of quiet denial of the very real tensions that are at play. And I think there is a bit of I don't usually like slippery slope arguments, but there is a bit of a slope that we can get on. It's between this, a variation of white feminist I don't see culture. We have a happy, inclusive family environment in our organization. We're all about one love and we're all in this together, that can very steadily get down that slope into sort of white feminine virtue signaling that actually erases the experience of our Black peers and colleagues and friends. And so doing that work is as much about being willing to call out the obvious Becky, Karen, Amy actions, but then also looking for where are the ways that it's seeping in at the corners and that I ordinarily wouldn't see because I too am a white lady, but that is eroding, kind of eroding the safety and the inclusion of the Black women, of the Black people in your organization or your community.
Yeah, I like the idea that you brought up about erasure, and essentially it's in co-opting a movement or co-opting a crew of a situation so that it becomes minimized, and definitely saying all lives matter to usurp the Black Lives Matter movement, when we clearly know that right now the situation is about Black people. If you've got 5 kids, I always say, and one of them breaks their legs, you don't take all of your children to the hospital to get a cast. You fix the leg that's broken, so that indeed everyone can be strengthened within this kind of family and culture. And shifting sort of that narrative is definitely minimizing what the real effort is. And we have to be very intentional and conscious about not doing that and just dealing with the issue at hand. And I think by taking care of those issues, we elevate everyone, we elevate the situation so that we can all be, in a stronger position.
Adrienne, if I could just add one point to that. Yes. One of the things that I've really observed about all of this is there's an unlearning that has to happen. I've really witnessed how in TikTok they've used, the whole platform has shifted, at least for me in my feed, from being cute dances to being really powerful statements, and also a lot of education about historical figures, things that we learned in school, all elements of things that we thought we knew one way, that we thought was truth and history, that we're now relearning and reevaluating and understanding were a completely different narrative and story. And you can fact check them and realize that actually what you're getting now is much closer to the truth. Yeah. And so it just highlights for us all, I think, that we have to kind of rethink everything. As these things get triggered in meetings or something comes up, as we even feel a reaction to something, I think that's a sign to take a pause and say, actually, the scope and the lens that I'm thinking about this through, is that even valid? Is that even, truth? And there's so much relearning, I think, that has to take place right now. If we're seeing it at a historical level, you can only imagine what it must be like in a contemporary level and in our organizations. And so I think every single time we have a reaction to something, it's a chance for us to physically recognize, actually pause and question the thinking that you're about to take, the way that you're about to approach this, because likely it's stemmed in historical ways of thinking that have been programmed and taught in your own mind in good faith.
Yeah.
Right. Go ahead, Megan.
Yeah, one more thing. Sorry, Adrienne. I just wanted to say, I know we're almost up on time, but I couldn't agree more with that, with what Beth Ann just shared. And I think that, the unlearning and relearning is something that I think it's free for all of us to do. It's time, right? It's the most scarce resource in many ways, but it's the most valuable thing that we can do out of the gate. And I'll just do a quick shout out. We have my team put together a Juneteenth a really robust resource that includes the pay it forward information. If you're interested as a leader in donating your time, or as a Black person at any stage in your career, and in accessing other Black leaders, other leaders who are interested in mentoring or giving support and access to their networks. And so a number of other opportunities for learning and unlearning. But I think that to me is where to start, is that we all really need to recognize that this is not a campaign. This is not a summer protest. This is something that is a lifelong journey, and we're all on it. And we need to continue to do that work, as uncomfortable as it may be, and as many mistakes as we may be making on a daily basis, putting our foot in our mouth, saying things, missing opportunities. All of that is part of the journey, and we need to get over it and be resilient and move forward and do better tomorrow.
I love that. And that's almost leading us to like our final closing words. And I'm just going to ask the question, Catherine, Beth Ann, Val, Megan, how will you get your girl? Stop her. What can you do? So Catherine, tell me, get your girl. How are you going to get your girl?
I'm going to very aggressively and non-femininely pull her into deprogramming work. Right? It's intervene and then work on the unlearning. I mean, we joked earlier about what's the class. I mean, you could have a class on deprogramming white femininity, right? And doing the work of unlearning and then reprogramming into anti-racist, racialized consciousness and, true allied and accomplice action. So I get her. I say, girl, you got to go to school. We're doing it together, right? This is not me saying I'm better and I can teach you, but let's do our work. And that's unlearning work and then new learning work. And we have to approach it humbly and curiously and actively.
Love it. Beth Ann.
Well, I'm going to continue to start with me. So I'm not going to defend that I'm not potentially at times that person, although I would like to believe not, but I'm going to keep doing the work personally first with myself. And then my word right now is unambiguous. This is black and white. And I just think that you can't hide in the shadows anymore. So for me, everything is about being unambiguous, being clear and calling it out.
Love it. Val?
I think I'm going to keep making mistakes and taking risks. And I say that because I think I step in it a lot, but it's because I want to try something new. And I think I have to, as a white woman, I need to get my girl by asking them questions that might make them uncomfortable, might make me uncomfortable. But what I really want to do is not just see the numbers in our business change, but I do, as Megan was saying, I want to be a mentor to some of those women, especially who have been, because I had good mentors who pulled me up and helped me. And I want to be that for people who need it, who at this juncture, because when because when they are in those positions of power, then other people are going to enter the industry and say that looks like me and I can have that job. And I think that's important. So I want to use the power I have to help get my girl.
Awesome. Megan?
Oh boy, taking us home here. I think that, my commitment is our mission at our company at Magnet Media has always been to tell stories that matter. And I want to commit here publicly to telling more Black stories. We have a monthly amazing VIP virtual event series called The Story, and Adrian's been part of it. Laura's been part of it. Thrilled to have such incredible, powerful, inspiring Black stories being shared with our community of marketers. And this Thursday, we have Sherelle Dorsey, who runs The Plug, who's doing phenomenal work around accountability. She has a project called the Tech Statement Project that's just getting off the ground. We're a sponsor of one of their data journalists this summer. And she is holding companies and brands accountable for not just making a statement, but really looking at the actions that they are following up with. And Dara Traceder, who's the CMO of Carbon, is also going to talk about when brands take a stand. So those are two incredible voices that I'm thrilled to be amplifying. And then I'll just say one other colleague of mine, DiFebo, wrote a phenomenal article called How to Be an Active Ally in the Workplace. You can find it on LinkedIn. It's amplified by other media outlets. And I would share that with all of us as I reread it on a regular basis. And she curated that. She was kind enough to curate it from other Black female leaders around what they wanted to see in an ally.
Great. Well, ladies, that is our time. I think this was like a really powerful conversation. I'm glad you all have committed to getting your girl. One of the things that I learned from Frances Fry, she's a Harvard professor, and she tells us to, make sure we honor the past, and that's by educating ourselves. And I think you all of you ladies are doing that, so you have a better understanding and a foundation from which to grow from. Then create, a strong mandate, a change mandate. And I think we're all committed to making a difference and, getting your girl, we'll start that change mandate. And just know that there is an optimistic path forward. There's possibilities, and we believe that there's change. And as long as we all have hope that there's some change there, that I think we can do it. So we are all allies. We're all sisters in this movement to create a better culture for our industry and for the world. So I thank you for making this small step and taking the small step to be a part of that change. So Megan, Catherine, Beth Ann, and Val, thank you so much. I hope you guys stay tuned. We have a really powerful session that starts at 10 a.m. called Holding Companies, Holding Agencies Accountable. We have Tiffany Warren, Judy Jackson, and Haida Gardner leading those conversations. They're the D&I leads for all the holding companies. So hopefully you'll stay or dial out and come back in for that session. So everyone, thank you so much for watching, and we will see you in our next WCW Can Diversity Collectives Inkwell Beaches Women Crush Wednesday session. Thank you guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Nice to meet you all.